My name is Anita, and I'm 37 years old. Standing in the lobby of the Grandview Resort, watching my own sister-in-law call security to escort me out, I couldn't help but laugh. The marble floors beneath my feet, the crystal chandeliers above my head, even the very uniform on the security guard approaching me, I paid for all of it. Because what my brother's family didn't know was that I'd been the anonymous owner of the entire Grandview hotel chain for the past 3 years. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and sweet revelation, let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you've ever dealt with toxic family members who underestimated you, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell because trust me, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. What would you do if your own family tried to humiliate you in a place you secretly owned? Keep watching to find out how I turned the tables on them in the most satisfying way possible. It all started 3 weeks ago when I received that cream-colored envelope in my mail. The return address made my stomach tighten, the Maxwell family estate, where I hadn't been welcome for years. Inside was a formal invitation to the family reunion, scheduled at the Grandview Resort, our chain's flagship property in the heart of downtown. The calligraphy was perfect, the wording cold and formal. "The Maxwell family requests the pleasure of your company," it read, as if I wasn't supposedly part of that family. You see, I was adopted by the Maxwells when I was 5 years old. My birth parents, who were my adoptive parents' best friends, died in a tragic car accident on a rainy night in November. The Maxwells took me in, but from day one I knew I was different. My adoptive brother Christopher, who was 10 at the time, made sure I never forgot that I wasn't real family. He would introduce me to his friends as the girl my parents felt sorry for and constantly reminded me that I was living in his house, eating his family's food, taking up space that belonged to real Maxwells. Christopher is 42 now, married to Victoria, a woman who came from old money and somehow managed to look down on everyone despite marrying into what she called new money. Victoria was 39, with perfectly styled blonde hair that probably cost more per month than most people's rent. She had this way of smiling that never reached her eyes, especially when she looked at me. Their 3 children, Brittany, 18, and headed to an expensive private college, Christopher Jr., 16, and just as entitled as his father, and Madison, 14, and already learning to perfect her mother's condescending looks. Had been taught from birth that Anita was someone to pity, not respect. When I turned 18, I left that house with nothing but a suitcase and the few $1,000s I'd saved from working at the local diner throughout high school. The Maxwells didn't offer to help with college, didn't co-sign loans, didn't even say goodbye properly. Christopher actually laughed when I loaded my beat-up Honda Civic, saying I'd be back within 6 months, when reality hit. Victoria stood in the doorway, examining her manicure, and mentioned something about how some people just aren't meant for more. But I was determined to prove them wrong. I worked 3 jobs while attending community college, then transferred to the State University where I studied business and hospitality management. I lived in a studio apartment so small that I could touch both walls when I stretched out my arms, ate ramen noodles more nights than I care to remember, and fell asleep over textbooks stained with coffee from my early morning shifts. When I graduated, I started at the bottom of the hotel industry, working as a night auditor at a budget motel off the highway. But I watched everything, learned everything, absorbed every piece of knowledge about the industry like a sponge. Within 5 years, I'd worked my way up to assistant manager at a mid-tier hotel. That's where I met my mentor, Robert Chin, who saw something in me that even I didn't see in myself at the time. He taught me about strategic investments, about reading market trends, about seeing opportunities where others saw problems. When he suggested I take my small savings and invest in a tech startup his nephew was founding, I trusted him. That $10,000 investment turned into $200,000 within 18 months. I reinvested wisely, diversified my portfolio, and within another 3 years, I had turned that into $2 million. 3 years ago, the Grandview hotel chain was in trouble. The family who had owned it for generations had mismanaged it into near bankruptcy. The properties were beautiful but outdated, the staff was demoralized, and occupancy rates were plummeting. I saw an opportunity. Using a shell company called AEM Holdings, my initials, I made an offer. It took every penny I had, plus some creative financing, but I acquired all 12 properties in the chain for $30 million. The turnaround wasn't easy. I spent 18-hour days visiting each property, meeting with staff, understanding what worked and what didn't. I modernized without losing the classic charm, improved employee benefits, which increased retention and morale, and implemented new marketing strategies that targeted both business and leisure travelers. Within 18 months, the Grandview hotel chain was not just profitable but thriving. Travel magazines started featuring our properties, celebrities began choosing us for their stays, and our revenue increased by 300%. Through all of this success, I never told my adoptive family. They never asked about my life beyond the perfunctory, "How are you?" at the rare family gatherings I attended, and I never volunteered information. They assumed I was still struggling, still that girl who left home with nothing. Christopher would occasionally make jokes about slipping me a 20 if I needed it, always in front of others, always with that cruel smile. Victoria would comment on my clothes, assuming they were from discount stores, not knowing I deliberately dressed down around them to avoid their scrutiny. So when I received that reunion invitation, I made a decision. I would attend, but I would go as they expected me to be, humble, struggling Anita. I booked the standard room they had assigned me in their block, not the penthouse suite I could have taken. I rented a modest Toyota Camry instead of driving one of my luxury vehicles. I packed my simplest clothes, leaving my designer pieces in my closet at home. I was curious to see how they would treat me when they thought I had nothing to offer them. The invitation mentioned that the reunion would last 4 days, with various family activities planned throughout. What they didn't mention was that it coincided with their annual charity auction, an event Victoria had been planning for months as her opportunity to shine among the city's social elite. She had been bragging on social media about securing the perfect venue and the amazing deal she had negotiated because of Christopher's connections. I had to smile when I read that, knowing that I had personally approved the event at cost to support the Children's Hospital, not because of any connection Christopher claimed to have. I arrived at the Grandview Resort on a Thursday afternoon, deliberately timing it to coincide with the family's scheduled welcome cocktail hour. The valet who took my rental car keys recognized me immediately. James had been with us for 2 years, but I gave him a subtle shake of my head. He played along perfectly, treating me like any other guest, though I caught the confusion in his eyes. I had sent a memo to key staff that I would be attending an event incognito and to treat me as a regular guest unless instructed otherwise. The lobby was exactly as I had envisioned it during our renovations. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow patterns on the walls, fresh orchids in massive arrangements that we changed twice weekly. The scent of our signature lavender and vanilla candles filled the air, mixed with the subtle notes of expensive perfume and leather from the designer boutique we had added last year. I paused for a moment, feeling that familiar pride in what we had created, before heading to the reception desk. That's where I first encountered Victoria. She was standing at the concierge desk, her voice carrying across the lobby as she berated James about some perceived slight. I specifically said we needed the Miranda room for our family photos, and you're telling me it's booked? Do you know who my husband is? James, ever professional, was apologizing and offering alternatives when Victoria spotted me. Her entire demeanor changed, shifting from entitled anger to calculated disdain in seconds. "Oh, Anita," she said, making my name sound like something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "You actually came." She looked me up and down, taking in my simple sundress and cardigan, her lips curving into that familiar smirk. "How nice. Though I do hope you brought something more appropriate for the formal dinners. You know how the other guests can be about dress codes at places like this." She turned to her friend Cynthia, who had appeared at her elbow, and stage whispered, "Anita is Christopher's adopted sister." We felt we had to include her, family obligations and all. Before I could respond, Christopher appeared from the bar area, a crystal tumbler of what looked like our premium whiskey in his hand. He'd gained weight since I'd last seen him, his face flushed either from alcohol or the effort of maintaining his bravado. "Well, well," he boomed, loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "Look who made it. Did you have trouble with the parking fees? I could have validated for you if you'd asked." He laughed at his own joke, elbowing his cousin Brad, who joined in with an uncomfortable chuckle. "I need to check in," I said simply, moving toward the reception desk. But Victoria wasn't done with her performance. She followed me, her heels clicking on the marble like a countdown to humiliation. "Oh, about your room," she said with false concern. "There was a tiny mix-up with the blocking, and we had to make some adjustments. But don't worry, we found you something suitable." The way she said suitable made it clear it was anything but. The front desk clerk, a new employee I didn't recognize, handed me the key card with an apologetic look. "Room 105, she said quietly. I knew exactly what room that was. A converted maintenance space we kept for emergency overflow, located next to the service elevator and the laundry facilities. It was clean and functional, but barely larger than a closet, with no windows and constant noise from the hotel's operations. We usually upgraded guests immediately if we ever had to use it, but Victoria had specifically requested I be placed there. Isn't that perfect?" Victoria trilled. "It's so cozy and economical. Just your style." Christopher added, "We figured you'd appreciate us being mindful of the budget. I know things must be tight on a secretary's salary or whatever it is you do now." They didn't wait for my response, already moving away to greet other arriving family members, leaving me standing at the desk with my room key. The walk to room 105 was illuminating. Along the way, I passed several employees who recognized me: Maria from housekeeping, Thomas from engineering, Susan from food service. Each one started to greet me warmly before catching themselves, remembering my instructions. I gave them small nods and smiles, letting them know I appreciated their discretion. The contrast between their genuine warmth and my family's cold dismissal wasn't lost on me. The room was exactly as bad as I remembered. The bed took up most of the space, leaving barely enough room to walk around it. The constant hum of the service elevator and the rhythmic thump of the industrial washing machines next door created a soundtrack of mechanical persistence. I sat on the bed for a moment, looking around the tiny space, and actually laughed. Here I was, owner of this entire building, sitting in its worst room because my family thought I deserved nothing better. I freshened up as best I could in the cramped bathroom and made my way to the restaurant for the welcome dinner. The Grandview's signature restaurant, the Sterling Room, was my particular pride. We had brought in a Michelin-starred chef, renovated the space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and created a menu that balanced innovation with classic comfort. The family had reserved the private dining room, and I could hear laughter and conversation as I approached. The moment I entered, conversations stuttered to a stop. I was clearly the last to arrive, and just as clearly, that had been orchestrated. The only available seat was at the far end of the table, separated from the main group by two empty chairs that Victoria quickly explained were being held for family members who might arrive late. The place setting in front of my seat was notably different. While everyone else had the full array of crystal and silver, mine was basic, as if I were a last-minute addition they hadn't properly planned for. Christopher stood, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Everyone, Anita made it after all. Let's welcome her to our little family gathering." The emphasis on "our" was unmistakable. I was just telling everyone about my latest project, a $60 million development on the waterfront. The investors are practically throwing money at me. I knew for a fact that his construction company had bid on 3 Grandview renovation projects in the last year, and we'd rejected all of them for substandard work and inflated pricing. As the dinner progressed, the slights continued. When the sommelier arrived with wine pairings, Victoria loudly announced that I probably wouldn't appreciate the subtleties and suggested I might prefer something simpler, like a house white. When the amuse-bouche arrived, a delicate composition of foie gras and truffle, she made sure everyone heard her explain to me what it was, as if I'd never encountered fine dining before. Christopher's children took their cues from their parents, With Christopher Jr. making snide comments about my dress and Brittany taking photos she clearly intended to mock on social media later. The main course was our chef's signature duck confit, a dish I had personally worked with him to perfect. As I savored the familiar flavors, listening to Christopher lie about his influence in the city's business community and Victoria name-drop people she barely knew, I caught sight of Marcus, our head of security, discreetly positioned by the door. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod, and I knew he was keeping an eye on things, ready to intervene if needed but respecting my wishes to maintain my cover. When the check arrived, Christopher made a great show of dividing it evenly, despite the fact that I had only ordered soup and salad while others had indulged in multiple courses and expensive wine. Now, he said when I quietly pointed this out, family shares equally. Though if it's a problem. He let the sentence hang, knowing others were watching, waiting for me to admit I couldn't afford it. I simply placed my credit card on the tray, noting the server's double-take when he recognized my name on the black American Express. The final insult of the evening came as we were leaving. Christopher Jr., with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, accidentally knocked over his wine glass, sending the contents cascading onto my dress. The red wine spread across the fabric like a crime scene, and the boy's smirk made it clear just how accidental it had been. "Oops," he said with false innocence. "Hope that wasn't expensive." Victoria tooted with fake concern, offering me a napkin while mentioning that water and club soda might help, though with fabric that cheap, it probably doesn't matter. I excused myself and returned to my tiny room, where the sound of the washing machines seemed almost sympathetic. As I changed out of the ruined dress, I thought about the next 3 days and what they would bring. My family had already shown their cards. They intended to humiliate me at every turn, to remind me of my place at the bottom of their hierarchy. What they didn't know is that every slight, every insult, every deliberate act of cruelty was being noted, not just by me but by my loyal staff who watched with growing indignation. The reunion had barely begun, and already the stage was being set for a revelation they would never see coming. The next morning arrived with the mechanical symphony of the service elevator and housekeeping carts, beginning their daily rounds at 5:30. Sleep had been intermittent at best, but I was used to early mornings from years of hotel management. I dressed in my swimsuit and cover-up, planning to enjoy the rooftop pool before the family activities began. The pool area was one of our crown jewels. An infinity edge overlooking the city, surrounded by cabanas and a full bar service that opened at 7. I arrived to find the pool empty except for an elderly couple doing gentle laps. The morning sun painted the water golden, and I settled onto a lounger with a book, enjoying the peace. That peace lasted exactly 45 minutes. I heard them before I saw them. Brittany's high-pitched laughter mixed with the voices of her cousins, all of them already loud despite the early hour. They swept into the pool area like a designer-clad tsunami, claiming the best cabanas with the entitled air of those who've never been told no. Brittany spotted me first, her eyes lighting up with the particular gleam that meant trouble. "Oh my God," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Is that Antonita? In a swimsuit from, 10 years ago?" She pulled out her phone, angling it in my direction. "This is too good. My followers are going to die." #Throwback Thursday came early. Her cousins joined in, all of them with their phones out, taking photos and videos while providing running commentary on everything from my tragic swim cover-up to my desperate attempt to fit in. I continued reading, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted, which only seemed to frustrate them more. Brittany moved closer, her friends flanking her like a mean girl army. "You know," she said conversationally, "this pool is usually for premium guests only. Are you sure you're supposed to be here?" One of her friends, a blonde named Kendall who seemed to be made entirely of hair extensions and vocal fry, added, "Maybe there's like a public pool somewhere that would be more appropriate." That's when Victoria arrived, dressed in a designer resort where that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She surveyed the scene with satisfaction, clearly pleased to see her daughter following in her footsteps. "Girls, you're being too kind," she said, settling into a cabana. Anita knows she's lucky we even included her in the family rate for the hotel. Though honestly, she directed this at me with a poisonous smile. The public pool at the YMCA down the street might be more your speed. Less intimidating. I was about to respond when James, my head concierge, appeared with a security guard I didn't recognize. Must have been new. Victoria had clearly summoned them. "This woman," she said, pointing at me like I was refuse that needed removing, "doesn't look like she belongs here. Could you please verify that she's actually a guest?" The irony was almost too much, being asked to prove I belonged in my own hotel. James struggled to maintain his composure, while the new security guard looked between Victoria and me with obvious confusion. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your room key," the guard said apologetically. I produced it, watching his face change as he recognized the room number. Even he knew 105 was not where typical guests stayed. Victoria's smile widened. "You see? She's in the overflow room. Barely counts as a real guest. Perhaps she should use the facilities more suited to her status." James intervened smoothly, his years of training evident. "All our guests have full access to hotel amenities, regardless of room category," he said firmly. "Will there be anything else, Mrs. Maxwell?" The use of her married name instead of the obsequious "ma'am" she expected made Victoria's eyes narrow. She waved him away dismissively, but not before shooting me a look that promised this wasn't over. After the pool incident, I returned to my room to change for the day's main event. A family brunch in one of our private event spaces. My phone had been buzzing with notifications, and I saw that Brittany had indeed posted the poolside photos. The captions were cruel but uncreative, variations on "poor relative crashes family vacation" and "when you can't afford the good life, but try anyway." What she didn't know was that our social media manager, who monitored all posts tagging the hotel, had screenshotted everything for our records. The brunch was being held in the Meridian Room, a space I had personally designed to feel like a luxurious living room with floor-to-ceiling bookcases, comfortable seating areas, and artwork from local artists. The family had already gathered when I arrived, and once again, my place had been set apart from the others, this time at a separate small table as if I were a child being punished. Christopher was holding court near the champagne station, regaling a group of cousins with tales of his business acumen. "The thing about real estate," he was saying pompously, "is knowing the right people. Like with this hotel, I've gotten in with the ownership. Could probably arrange a tour of the penthouse if anyone's interested." I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The in he thought he had was with our sales manager, who had politely declined all his requests for special treatment. The buffet was spectacular. Our chef had outdone himself with both breakfast and lunch options, fresh fruit displays that looked like art, and a made-to-order omelet station. As I filled my plate, Victoria appeared beside me, speaking just loudly enough for others to hear. "Don't be greedy, Anita. I know free food must be exciting for you, but try to remember others need to eat too." Someone behind us giggled, and I recognized the voice as belonging to her sister, another piece of work who had married well and never let anyone forget it. I found an empty chair at my assigned table and began eating, trying to tune out the continued commentary from the main group. But Christopher wasn't done with his performance. He had moved on to talking about his plans to acquire some hospitality properties and how he was in talks with major players in the industry. "In fact," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "I'm meeting with some investors this weekend. Might even make an offer on this place if the price is right." That's when he noticed me sitting alone and decided to make me part of his show. "Anita," he called out, "you used to work in hotels, didn't you? Some little motel or something. Maybe you could give me some advice." The laughter that followed was ugly, meant to hurt. Though I suppose running a budget and off the highway isn't quite the same as managing a property like this. "I've had some experience," I said quietly, which only encouraged him more. "Some experience," he repeated mockingly. "Hear that, everyone? Anita has some experience. Maybe we should put her in charge of turning down the beds." More laughter. Christopher Jr. added his own contribution. "Or cleaning them," which earned him an approving nod from his father. The torture session was interrupted by the arrival of Robert Dalton, one of the city's most successful developers and someone Christopher had been desperately trying to connect with for years. What Christopher didn't know was that Robert and I had done several deals together, and he was one of the few people who knew about my ownership of the Grandview chain. He spotted me immediately and started to approach, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. I caught his eye and gave a tiny shake of my head. He paused, understanding immediately, and smoothly changed direction toward Christopher instead. But the brief moment hadn't gone unnoticed. "How does Anita know Robert Dalton?" I heard Victoria whisper urgently to Christopher. He brushed it off, saying I had probably served him coffee somewhere, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. After brunch, there was a brief break before the afternoon's activities. I used the time to meet quietly with my management team in a service area where the family wouldn't venture. My general manager, Dorothy, was barely containing her fury. "Ms. Maxwell, the way they're treating you is absolutely unacceptable. And the demands they've been making, free upgrades, comped meals, threatening staff members. Security has reports of Christopher telling 3 different employees he could have them fired. Document everything," I told them. "Every threat, every demand, every instance of staff mistreatment. And make sure our people know their jobs are safe. Anyone Christopher threatens should report it immediately." Marcus, my security chief, added that Victoria had been particularly cruel to the housekeeping staff, complaining about imaginary problems and demanding her room be cleaned multiple times a day. "She made Lucia cry yesterday," he said grimly. Accused her of stealing a bracelet that Victoria later found in her own purse. No apology, of course. The afternoon brought more of the same. During a family game session in the garden courtyard, I was picked last for every team event, with theatrical groans from whichever side got stuck with me. When we played charades, every clue I gave was met with exaggerated confusion and comments about my inability to communicate clearly. Victoria made sure to mention, repeatedly and loudly, how some people just didn't have the breeding to excel at sophisticated games. But the worst was yet to come. That evening, Christopher had arranged to meet with potential investors in the hotel's business center. He had told them he had connections to Grandview's ownership and could facilitate a partnership. I watched from a distance as he showed them around like he owned the place, making promises he had no authority to make, lying about occupancy rates and revenue that he pulled from thin air. When he spotted me passing by, he loudly told his guests to pay no attention to the help. The final straw of the day came when I returned to my room to find my belongings had been searched. Nothing was missing, but everything had been moved slightly, clothes refolded differently, toiletries rearranged. The only explanation came later when I overheard Victoria telling someone that she'd had security check my room because you never know with people like that. She might be stealing amenities to sell online. The security footage, which I reviewed later, showed Victoria herself entering with a master key she'd somehow obtained, going through my belongings with the kind of vindictive thoroughness that spoke of years of practice. That night, as I lay in my tiny room listening to the endless cycle of the washing machines, I thought about how different things might have been. If they had shown me even basic human kindness, if they had treated me as actual family instead of an unwanted obligation, I might have shared my success with them. I might have helped Christopher's struggling business, found a place for him in my company, made sure his children had opportunities. But they had chosen cruelty instead, and tomorrow would begin their education in consequences. Saturday morning dawned with all the promise of a perfect disaster. The charity auction was scheduled for that evening, and Victoria had been in full general mode since dawn, barking orders at hotel staff and family members alike. I watched from the restaurant terrace as she terrorized the events team, who were setting up the ballroom according to her exacting specifications. What she didn't know was that I had personally approved overtime pay for every staff member dealing with her, considering it hazard pay. The auction was ostensibly for the Children's Hospital, a cause I genuinely supported and had donated to generously over the years. But for Victoria, it was clearly more about social climbing than charity. She had managed to attract an impressive guest list by promising an exclusive event at the Grandview, playing up her connections to secure the venue. The irony that she was using my hotel to boost her social status while simultaneously treating me like dirt wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. At the morning planning meeting, held in the same Meridian room where yesterday's brunch had taken place, Victoria assigned roles to family members with military precision. Christopher would handle the VIP guests, meaning he would schmooze with anyone he thought could benefit his business. The teenagers would serve as greeters and assistants, but only the presentable ones, Victoria added with a pointed look in my direction. When it came to me, she paused dramatically. "Anita," she said slowly, as if speaking to a child, "we need someone to help with behind-the-scenes tasks. You know, checking coats, making sure the bathrooms stay clean, that sort of thing. Nothing that would require you to interact with our actual guests." She smiled sweetly while delivering this insult. We wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong impression about the family. Her sister Margaret chimed in. Maybe she could help the hotel staff? She must know some of them from her previous work. The way she said previous work made it sound like I'd been doing something unsavory. Christopher added his own touch. Just keep her away from the auction items. We wouldn't want any confusion about what's for sale and what's not. I agreed quietly to whatever role they wanted to assign me, watching as they preened and planned, dividing up the expected glory among themselves. Victoria went on to describe the auction items they'd secured: vacation packages, jewelry, art pieces from local artists. Then she dropped her bombshell, and the crown jewel, a $50,000 luxury package at this very hotel, including the penthouse suite, private chef, spa treatments, the works. My connections really came through on that one. I had to excuse myself to hide my laughter. The connections that had secured that package was me, approving the donation through our charitable giving program. The documentation clearly showed it came from hotel ownership, but Victoria had apparently claimed credit for arranging it. Even better, I heard Christopher whispering to Brad about their plan to bid on it themselves using a proxy, then resell it for profit. They had no idea that I'd already arranged for the package to be non-transferable. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of perceived slights and small humiliations. When the event space was being decorated, Victoria made sure to position me as far from the action as possible, having me sort auction paddles in a back corner while making comments about utilizing everyone according to their abilities. When the photographer arrived to take promotional shots of the family with the auction items, I was told to help behind the camera because we need our best faces forward. But something interesting was happening. The hotel staff, who had been watching this treatment all weekend, began finding small ways to show their support. Dorothy personally brought me lunch when the family forgot to include me in their catered meal. James made sure I had a complete event schedule despite Victoria telling him I didn't need one. Even the new security guard from the pool incident found me to apologize quietly, saying he'd had no idea who I was and was mortified by the situation. Around 3 o'clock, I slipped away for another meeting with my executive team. This time, we met in my actual office, a space the family had no idea existed, hidden behind an unmarked door near the business center. The contrast between my cramped guest room and this spacious office with its city views and comfortable furniture was stark. My team had updates that made my decision about the evening's revelation even clearer. "They've been getting worse," Dorothy reported. Christopher cornered 2 of our junior managers, trying to get them to reveal information about the hotel's finances. He claimed he was a major shareholder and threatened their jobs when they wouldn't comply. Victoria accused housekeeping of deliberately providing substandard service to make her look bad in front of her guests. She actually tried to get Maria fired for using the wrong brand of fabric softener. Marcus added his own concerns. "They've been asking questions about you, boss. After Mr. Dalton recognized you at brunch, Christopher has been probing, trying to figure out the connection. He asked 3 different employees if you'd ever worked here before. The staff has been brilliant at playing dumb, but it's only a matter of time before something slips." My CFO, William, had perhaps the most interesting news. I did some checking on Christopher's construction company. They're in serious trouble. 3 lawsuits pending for substandard work, licensing issues with the city, and their bonding company is threatening to drop them. Those investors he's been courting? They're actually creditors he's trying to sweet-talk into extending his loans. The $60 million project he keeps bragging about? It's a failed strip mall development that's been in litigation for 2 years. As the afternoon wore on, the energy in the hotel shifted. The charity auction always attracted the city's elite, and they began arriving early to enjoy cocktails and the hotel's ambience. I watched from various vantage points as Christopher and Victoria went into full performance mode, acting like they owned the place. Victoria gave impromptu tours to her society friends, making up facts about the hotel's history and taking credit for design choices I had personally made. Christopher held court in the bar, buying rounds with the desperate air of a man trying to impress people who had already written him off. The most telling moment came when I was helping arrange auction items in the ballroom, Victoria's idea of keeping me busy and out of sight. Mayor Patricia Winters arrived early, and I watched Victoria practically sprint across the lobby to intercept her. What Victoria didn't know was that Patricia and I served on the same charitable boards and had become friends over the years. Patricia spotted me through the ballroom doors and started to wave, but I shook my head slightly. She understood immediately, though I saw her eyebrows raise in question. As 5 o'clock approached and the cocktail hour officially began, Victoria found me arranging bidding sheets and delivered her final instructions. "Stay in the background, Anita. These are important people, and we can't have you, well, you understand. Maybe you could watch from the back of the room? Oh, and Christopher wanted me to tell you that you're welcome to bid on the silent auction items, the ones under $50, of course. We wouldn't want you to overextend yourself." She swept away in a cloud of designer perfume and self-importance, leaving me standing among the glittering prizes her guests would bid on. The centerpiece was my donation, the $50,000 package displayed with a prominence that made it clear it was the star of the show. The bidding sheet already had several names, including a suspiciously generic private bidder that I recognized as Christopher's handwriting. As guests began filling the ballroom, I did as instructed and faded into the background. But I wasn't alone. Throughout the room, strategically positioned, were my department heads and senior staff. They weren't there in any official capacity. They'd bought tickets like any other guests. But I knew they were there to witness what was about to unfold. Dorothy caught my eye and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Marcus positioned himself near the main exit. James stood ready by the audio-visual controls. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the final act of our little drama was about to begin. Victoria was in her element, air-kissing acquaintances and basking in the perceived success of her event. Christopher was working the room like a desperate salesman, which I supposed he was. Their children held court among the younger guests, their entitled attitudes on full display. And I stood in the back, invisible to my family, but seen by the people who truly mattered, my staff, my friends, my real community. The auction would begin soon, and with it, the revelation that would shatter the Maxwell family's carefully constructed illusions about their place in the world and mine. The cocktail hour was in full swing when the first domino fell. I was stationed near the coat check, ostensibly helping the attendant but really observing the room, when Christopher decided to make a scene. He'd been drinking steadily since 5, and liquid courage had transformed into liquid stupidity. A young desk clerk named Timothy had ventured into the ballroom to deliver a message to one of the guests, and Christopher intercepted him. "You," Christopher slurred slightly, pointing at Timothy with his whiskey glass. "You're the one who couldn't find us a proper suite when we arrived. Do you have any idea who I am?" Timothy, who was new and nervous, stammered an apology he didn't know. But Christopher wasn't satisfied with submission. He wanted humiliation. "I asked you a question. Do you know who I am?" The ballroom's ambient conversation dimmed as people turned to watch. Victoria, instead of being embarrassed by her husband's behavior, decided to double down. She glided over, placing a possessive hand on Christopher's arm while fixing Timothy with her coldest stare. "This is exactly the kind of incompetence we've been dealing with all weekend," she announced to anyone within earshot. "My husband has connections to the ownership of this hotel. One word from him, and you'll be looking for a new job by Monday. Timothy looked terrified, and I started to move forward, but Dorothy beat me to it. Is there a problem here? She asked smoothly, inserting herself between Timothy and my brother. Christopher rounded on her, not recognizing the general manager of the hotel he claimed to have influence over. Yes, there's a problem. Your staff is incompetent, and I want this one. He jabbed a finger at Timothy, fired. Tonight. I'm afraid I can't do that, sir, Dorothy replied calmly. Timothy is an excellent employee, and he's done nothing wrong. Christopher's face flushed darker. Do you know who you're talking to? I could buy and sell you, lady. I want to speak to your manager. Better yet, I want to speak to the owner. Get them here. Now. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He was demanding to speak to me, while I stood not 20 feet away, invisible in my assigned role as coat check assistant. Victoria, sensing the scene was drawing too much attention from guests, tried a different tactic. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, she suggested, but her voice carried the threat clearly. After all, we wouldn't want to make a scene at a charity event. But rest assured, we will be addressing this with the appropriate people. Your staff should learn their place. She looked directly at me when she said that last part, a reminder that in her mind, I was just another service worker who needed to be put in line. The confrontation finally dispersed when Mayor Winters approached, asking Victoria about the auction schedule. Christopher gave Timothy one last threatening look before allowing himself to be led away. Dorothy quietly told Timothy to take a break, assuring him his job was safe. I made a mental note to give both Dorothy and Timothy bonuses after this weekend was over. As the auction began, I found myself relegated to the very back of the room, standing with the catering staff who were preparing to serve dinner after the bidding. The auctioneer, a local celebrity Victoria had recruited, began working through the items with professional enthusiasm. Each successful bid was met with applause, and Victoria basked in the glory, making sure everyone knew she had personally secured each donation. The bidding was spirited, with the city's wealthy competing good-naturedly for vacation packages and art pieces. Christopher bid ostentatiously on several items, making sure everyone saw him raising his paddle. What they didn't see was the sweat on his forehead when he was outbid, or the relief in his eyes when someone topped his offers. He was playing a role he couldn't afford, and it was painful to watch. Then came the moment Victoria had been building toward all evening. The $50,000 hotel package. The auctioneer described it in glowing terms: a week in the penthouse suite, private chef services, unlimited spa treatments, private tours, essentially the ultimate Grandview experience. This incredibly generous donation, the auctioneer announced, comes directly from hotel ownership, secured through the efforts of tonight's wonderful hostess, Victoria Maxwell. Victoria stood to acknowledge the applause, actually taking a small bow. I watched from my corner, amazed at the sheer audacity of claiming credit for my donation. The bidding started at $10,000, quickly climbing as several bidders competed. Christopher's proxy bidder jumped in at $30,000, but was quickly overtaken. At $40,000, most bidders dropped out, leaving just two, the proxy and Mrs. Chin, a philanthropist known for her generous support of children's causes. The proxy bid $45,000. Mrs. Chin raised to $50,000. The proxy went to $55,000, which was interesting since I knew Christopher didn't have that kind of money. Mrs. Chin seemed to consider, then smiled and raised her paddle. $75,000, she said clearly. The room gasped, and the proxy bidder frantically looked to Christopher, who was sheet white. There was no way he could match that, not without bouncing checks. $75,000 going once, twice, sold to Mrs. Chin. The room erupted in applause. Victoria's smile was forced now, realizing the package she'd hoped to profit from was gone. Mrs. Chin made her way to the stage to accept the certificate, pausing to shake Victoria's hand. Such a generous donation, she said into the microphone. Please pass my thanks to the actual owner. I'm sure they'll be pleased to know the money is going to such a worthy cause. The emphasis on actual owner wasn't lost on those of us paying attention. Victoria's smile became even more strained as she assured Mrs. Chin she would pass along the message to the appropriate parties. Christopher, meanwhile, was drowning his disappointment at the bar, his voice getting louder as he told anyone who would listen about his close relationship with the hotel's management. As the evening progressed, things deteriorated further. Victoria discovered that I had been helping with coat check and made a scene about family members doing menial work and how it reflected poorly on the Maxwell name. She actually tried to physically pull me away from the coat check, causing several guests to stare. "You're embarrassing us," she hissed. "Again. Why can't you just stay in your room?" That's when something snapped. Maybe it was the weekend of accumulated insults, or maybe it was the way she said "your room," like it was a kennel where they kept an unwanted dog. But I stood my ground. "I'm helping with the charity event," I said calmly. "Isn't that what family does?" Victoria's face flushed. "Family? You're not family. You're a burden my in-laws took on, and look how you repay them. Skulking around, trying to insert yourself where you don't belong." Christopher appeared, drawn by his wife's raised voice. "What's the problem now?" he asked, and the now carried all the exhaustion of someone who'd been dealing with problems all evening. Victoria pointed at me like I was evidence in a crime. "She's making a scene, trying to pretend she's part of this. I want her removed. Now." "You heard her," Christopher said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "You need to leave. You're disturbing our guests." The irony of him accusing me of disturbing guests after his performance with Timothy wasn't lost on me. "I'm not disturbing anyone," I replied. "I'm volunteering at a charity event." Christopher's face darkened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just go." That's when Marcus appeared, flanked by 2 security guards. Victoria's face lit up with triumph. "Finally," she said. "Please escort this woman out. She's been harassing guests and staff all evening." Marcus looked at me, waiting. I could see the question in his eyes. Was it time? I gave him the slightest shake of my head. "Not yet. But soon." "Ma'am," Marcus said formally, turning to me, "I need to ask you to come with me." I nodded, letting him lead me away while Victoria's satisfied smirk burned into my memory. But instead of leading me out of the hotel, Marcus escorted me to a small office adjacent to the ballroom. "Sorry about that, boss," he said quietly once we were alone. "But I figured this would get you out of there before things escalated further. Dorothy says everything's ready for when you want to make your move." Through the office window, I could see the auction winding down. Victoria was on stage, thanking everyone for their generosity and taking credit for an event she'd done nothing but host. Christopher was still at the bar, now openly discussing his plans to acquire the hotel with anyone drunk enough to listen. Their children were taking selfies with the auction items, already posting about their charity work on social media. "How long do you want to wait?" Marcus asked. I considered. The auction was essentially over, just the final acknowledgments remaining. Most of the major donors were still present, including several who knew me personally, but had respected my wishes to remain anonymous. The entire staff was in position, ready to drop the facade when I gave the word. Let them finish their victory lap, I decided. When Victoria starts her closing speech, that's when we move. Have James ready with the presentation. And Marcus? Make sure our legal team is on standby. Christopher's been making some claims tonight that border on fraud. Marcus grinned. Already done, boss. They've been documenting everything. I settled into the office chair to wait, watching my adopted family through the window as they celebrated their perceived triumph. Victoria was radiant with success, Christopher was drunk on borrowed importance, and their children were already counting the social media clout they'd gained from the evening. They had no idea that their house of cards was about to collapse, brought down by the very person they'd tried so hard to diminish. The clock on the wall showed 9:45. In 15 minutes, Victoria would begin her closing remarks. And then, finally, it would be my turn to speak. At exactly 10 p.m., Victoria took the stage for her closing remarks. She had changed into an even more elaborate gown for this moment, clearly intending to end the evening as the star. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly, a spotlight illuminating her as she gripped the podium with perfectly manicured hands. I watched from the side door as she began what she clearly thought would be her triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with false modesty, "tonight has been an incredible success, and I'm so grateful to each of you for your generous support of the Children's Hospital." She paused for applause, basking in it. When I decided to host this event, I knew I wanted somewhere special, somewhere that would reflect the importance of our cause. Through my connections, I was able to secure this beautiful venue at the prestigious Grandview Hotel. Christopher, stationed near the bar, raised his glass in salute to his wife. He'd moved from drunk to sloppy, but was still coherent enough to loudly affirm, "That's right. Family connections go a long way in this business." Several people laughed politely, though I noticed more than a few exchanged knowing looks. His reputation in the business community was worse than he realized. Victoria continued, "The Grandview has been the perfect partner for this event. As many of you know, my husband Christopher has extensive ties to the hospitality industry, and we're so fortunate to have been able to leverage those relationships for such a worthy cause." She went on to thank various committee members, all while positioning herself as the central figure who had made everything possible. That's when James appeared at my elbow. "Ready when you are, Ms. Maxwell," he whispered. "The presentation is loaded, and all department heads are in position." I straightened my simple dress, the same one Christopher Jr. had accidentally spilled wine on, now with a faint stain I decided to wear as a badge of honor. It was time. "The management of the Grandview would like to say a few words," James announced from the AV booth, his voice cutting through Victoria's speech. She looked annoyed at the interruption but couldn't gracefully refuse. "Of course," she said tightly. "Though I wasn't aware. I mean, yes, let's hear from the hotel staff." I entered through the main doors, walking slowly down the center aisle. The room was packed with over 200 guests, including city council members, business leaders, and society figures. Many recognized me immediately. We'd served on boards together, made deals together, shared meals at various functions. Their expressions ranged from confusion to dawning understanding as they realized something significant was happening. Christopher spotted me first. "What the hell are you doing?" He slurred loudly. "Security. The woman you removed is back." But Marcus and his team remained motionless, standing at attention around the room's perimeter. Victoria's face went from annoyed to alarmed as she watched me approach the stage. "Anita," she said into the microphone, her voice sharp, "this is a private event. You need to leave. Now." I climbed the steps to the stage with measured steps. Behind me, the large screens that had been displaying auction items flickered to life with the Grandview Hotel chain logo, not just this property, but all 12 hotels in our portfolio. Victoria stepped back from the podium as I approached, her eyes darting between me and the screens. "What is this?" she demanded. "What are you doing?" "Good evening, everyone," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear. "I apologize for the interruption, but I wanted to personally thank you all for your generous support of the Children's Hospital tonight. My name is Anita Maxwell, and I'm the owner and CEO of the Grandview Hotel chain." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom. Christopher's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth open in a small O of shock. Around the room, guests who knew me began to nod and smile, while those who didn't looked between me and the Maxwell family with growing interest. "That's impossible," Christopher finally managed, his voice cracking. "You're lying. This is fraud. Someone call the police." But no one moved. Instead, James triggered the presentation, and the screens began showing documentation. Corporation papers, press releases from trade publications announcing my acquisition 3 years ago, photos of me with the governor at the chain's relaunch celebration. 3 years ago, I continued conversationally, as if we were having tea, I purchased the Grandview Hotel chain through my company, AEM Holdings. We've since renovated all properties, increased revenue by 300%, and employed over 2,000 people across the state. This particular property, our flagship, has been featured in Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast, and was recently awarded 5 stars by Forbes Travel Guide. Victoria found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. But you can't be, we gave you that tiny room. The screens changed again, now showing security footage from the weekend. Christopher threatening Timothy, Victoria berating housekeeping staff, both of them claiming connections they didn't have, demanding services they hadn't paid for, and most damningly, discussing their plan to resell the auction package. Yes, about that tiny room, I said, allowing myself a small smile. Room 105, our emergency overflow space. Interesting choice for family, wouldn't you say? Though I must admit, the proximity to the laundry facilities did provide an authentic urban experience. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Everyone could sense the tension, the delicious scandal of it all. Christopher tried to salvage the situation, stumbling toward the stage. "This is a misunderstanding," he said desperately. "Anita is family. We've always supported her. Haven't we, honey? Tell them." But Victoria was staring at the screens, which now showed a compilation of every slight, every insult, every moment of cruelty from the weekend. Someone in the crowd gasped as they watched Victoria demand I be removed from the pool area. "I particularly enjoyed," I said, my voice hardening slightly, "being accused of theft, subjected to illegal room searches, and threatened with termination from a job I didn't have. Mr. Beaumont," I looked directly at Christopher, "you told several people tonight that you could have my staff fired. You claimed to have ownership stakes in my hotels. You presented yourself as someone with authority here. Would you like to clarify those statements for our guests?" Christopher's face had gone from red to white to an alarming shade of green. I mean, he looked around wildly for support, but found none. Even his drinking buddies had stepped away, suddenly very interested in their phones or the ceiling. "You set us up," he accused. "This whole thing was a trap." "A trap," I repeated. "No, Christopher. This was a test. And you failed spectacularly." The screens now showed his construction company's failed bids for Grandview contracts, complete with notes about substandard work and inflated pricing. "By the way, those investors you've been courting all weekend? They might be interested to know that your company has been suspended from bidding on state contracts due to licensing violations." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several men in suits, clearly the investors in question, were already heading for the exits. Christopher watched his prospects literally walk away, his face crumbling. But I wasn't done. The weekend of humiliation, the years of treatment as less than, the constant reminder that I didn't belong, it all demanded a full accounting. "The $50,000 package that was auctioned tonight?" I continued. "That was my personal donation to the Children's Hospital, arranged through our charitable foundation. Not through any connections Victoria claimed to have." "And Christopher, that proxy bidder you arranged? We have the documentation." Attempting to purchase auction items for resale at a charity event is not only unethical, it may be illegal. Our legal team will be in touch. Victoria finally found her voice again, and it came out as a shriek. "You can't do this. We're family. We took you in when you had nothing." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and I let them settle before responding. "Yes," I said quietly, but the microphone carried every word. "You took in a 5-year-old orphan. And then you spent the next 32 years reminding me that I should be grateful for every crumb. Well, Victoria, here's your crumb back." The screens changed one final time, showing a single document, a formal notice banning the Christopher Maxwell family from all Grandview properties, effective immediately. "Your belongings will be packed and waiting for you at the concierge desk," I informed them. "You have 1 hour to vacate the premises. After that, you will be considered trespassers and treated accordingly. You can't ban us." Christopher shouted, desperation making his voice crack. "I'll sue. I'll own this place when I'm done with you." That's when our legal counsel, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward. "Mr. Maxwell," he said calmly, "I'd advise against any legal action. Between your fraudulent claims of ownership, threats against staff, and attempted theft of services, you're looking at significant liability. I suggest you leave quietly. The ballroom erupted in whispers and not-so-subtle phone usage as guests began sharing the scandal in real time. Victoria grabbed Christopher's arm, hissing something about damage control, but the damage was done. Their children, who had been live-streaming parts of the evening, suddenly found their phones very interesting as comments flooded in from viewers who had witnessed their humiliation in real time. As security began to gently but firmly escort the Maxwell family out, Victoria turned back one last time. "You're nothing," she spat. "You'll always be nothing. Just an orphan we felt sorry for." I looked at her steadily, then at the room full of respected business leaders, philanthropists, and community pillars who were now applauding. "Maybe," I said into the microphone, "but I'm an orphan who owns the ground you're standing on. Goodbye, Victoria." The ballroom emptied slowly after the Maxwell family's dramatic exit. Guests lingered, approaching me with congratulations, shared stories of their own family challenges, and more than a few business proposals. But I wasn't interested in networking just yet. Instead, I made my way through the crowd to my staff, who had maintained perfect professionalism throughout the entire ordeal. Timothy, the desk clerk Christopher had threatened, was first. "I'm doubling your salary," I told him quietly. "And you're enrolled in our management training program starting Monday. Anyone who can handle that kind of abuse with such grace belongs in leadership." His eyes widened, and he stammered out thanks before Dorothy led him away, already discussing his new opportunities. Maria from housekeeping was next, surrounded by her colleagues who had all experienced Victoria's wrath. "I heard she made you cry," I said gently. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." Maria shook her head, smiling through fresh tears. "Happy ones this time." "It's okay, Miss Maxwell. We all knew you would make it right." I announced on the spot that the entire housekeeping staff would receive trauma bonuses and an extra week of paid vacation. The security footage of the evening's drama had already been edited and saved, not for public consumption, but for legal protection. Christopher's threats of lawsuits were empty, we all knew that, but it paid to be prepared. My legal team reported that the Maxwells had left the property without further incident, though not without Victoria attempting to take several bathrobes that she'd paid for with her booking. The irony that they'd been comped the room as family wasn't lost on anyone. As the ballroom finally cleared, I found myself alone on the stage where it had all unfolded. The auction had raised over $400,000 for the Children's Hospital, a record for the event. Mrs. Chin, who had won the grand prize package, had already announced she would be donating her week's stay to a family with a child undergoing long-term treatment. That's what real charity looked like, not the performative generosity of people like Victoria, but genuine kindness with no expectation of recognition. My phone had been buzzing nonstop with messages. Word of the evening's events had spread quickly through the business community. Robert Chin, my old mentor, texted simply, "Proud of you. Dinner Tuesday to celebrate." The mayor called personally to congratulate me and to assure me that Christopher's claims about his influence in city development were being investigated. Apparently, he'd been using his false connection to me to secure meetings he had no business attending. But among all the congratulations and business offers, one message stood out. It was from my adoptive parents, the elder Maxwells who had retired to Florida 5 years ago. "We heard what happened," my adoptive mother had written. Christopher called ranting. "We're ashamed of how he and Victoria treated you. You deserved better from this family. We're proud of what you've accomplished. Love, Mom and Dad." It was the first time in 32 years they'd acknowledged the treatment I'd received from their biological son. The first time they'd said they were proud of me without qualifying it. I sat in my real office. Not the tiny room 105, but the executive suite on the top floor, and finally allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness or anger, but from release. The weight I'd carried for so long, the need to prove myself worthy of basic human dignity, finally lifted. The next morning, I called a staff meeting. Every employee who had worked during the reunion weekend gathered in the main conference room. "I owe you all an apology," I began, which clearly wasn't what they expected. I put you in an impossible position, asking you to pretend not to know me while watching me be mistreated. That wasn't fair to any of you." The room erupted in protests. They understood. They were happy to help. They were proud to work for someone who could handle such treatment with grace. "Nevertheless," I continued, "loyalty like yours deserves recognition. Everyone who worked this weekend is receiving a bonus equal to 1 month's salary. Additionally, we're implementing a new policy. Any guest who threatens or abuses our staff will be immediately removed from the property, no exceptions. You deserve to work with dignity and respect, always." The days that followed brought their own revelations. Christopher's construction company filed for bankruptcy within a week, his investors fleeing after learning of his fraudulent claims. Victoria's social media accounts, once carefully curated showcases of wealth and privilege, became ghost towns as her society friends distanced themselves from the scandal. Their children, forced to confront the reality that their lifestyle was built on lies and cruelty, had to transfer to public schools when the expensive private academies suddenly found enrollment issues. But I took no joy in their downfall. If anything, I felt a strange sort of pity. They had spent so much energy trying to keep me down, reminding me of my place, that they'd failed to build anything real for themselves. While I was working 18-hour days to build my business, Christopher was coasting on family money and false promises. While I was learning to transform struggling properties into thriving hotels, Victoria was learning to social climb without a stable ladder. A month later, I received an unexpected visitor. Brittany, my 18-year-old niece, stood in my office lobby, nervous and clearly humbled. My assistant asked if I wanted to see her, and after a moment's hesitation, I agreed. She entered my office, the one her parents never knew existed, with none of her former swagger. "Aunt Anita," she began, then stopped, tears filling her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We were horrible to you. I was horrible to you." She went on to explain that losing her private school had been a wake-up call. She'd gotten a job at a local restaurant and was learning what it meant to work for a living, to be treated poorly by customers who saw service workers as beneath them. "I get it now," she said quietly. "How you must have felt all those years." I studied her for a long moment, then made a decision. "Apology accepted," I told her. "And if you're serious about learning the value of hard work, we have an internship program here. Entry-level, minimum wage to start. You'll work every department. Housekeeping, food service, front desk. If you can handle it for 6 months without complaint, we'll talk about college tuition assistance." Her eyes widened with hope. "You do that? After everything?" I smiled, remembering my own journey from nothing to CEO. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Brittany. But only one. Don't waste it." She left with an internship application and what looked like the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. The Children's Hospital sent a beautiful thank you letter, complete with drawings from young patients who would benefit from the funds raised. They also mentioned that an anonymous donor had matched the entire auction total. I didn't tell them it was me. True charity, I'd learned, didn't need recognition. It was enough to know that children would receive better care because of that evening. 6 months later, the Grandview hosted another charity auction. This time, I served as the official host, standing proudly at the podium where Victoria had once claimed credit for my work. The event raised even more money, with guests commenting on how much more genuine and warm it felt compared to the previous year. Brittany, now halfway through her internship and thriving, helped coordinate the event, having learned the value of actual work versus performed importance. As I stood on that stage, looking out at a room full of people who respected me for what I'd built rather than the family I'd been born or adopted into, I thought about the long journey from that 5-year-old orphan to the woman I'd become. The Maxwells had been right about one thing: I wasn't real family. Their definition of family was based on blood, privilege, and the ability to diminish others to elevate yourself. My definition was different. Family was Dorothy, who'd stood up to Christopher to protect young Timothy. It was Marcus and James and all the staff who'd kept my secret while watching me endure humiliation. It was Robert Chin, who'd seen potential in a struggling young woman and nurtured it. It was even Brittany who'd found the courage to apologize and work for forgiveness rather than expect it. The lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about revenge or revelations. It was about the danger of letting others define your worth. For too many years, I'd accepted the Maxwell family's assessment of my value, less than, not quite enough, someone to be tolerated rather than celebrated. But their opinion of me had never been about me at all. It was about their own insecurities, their need to feel superior by making someone else inferior. Success, I realized, isn't about proving your worth to people who refuse to see it. It's about recognizing your own value and building something meaningful regardless of who believes in you. The Grandview hotel chain succeeded not because I wanted to show up the Maxwells, but because I wanted to create something beautiful, to provide exceptional service, to employ thousands of people and give them opportunities to grow. If Christopher and Victoria had shown me even basic kindness, I would have shared my success with them gladly. I would have helped their business, provided opportunities for their children, made them part of the empire I'd built. But they chose cruelty, and in doing so, they chose their own fate. The opposite of success isn't failure. It's the bitter mediocrity of those who spend their energy tearing others down instead of building themselves up. Today, the Grandview hotel chain continues to thrive. We've expanded to 15 properties, each one a testament to what can be achieved when you focus on excellence rather than exclusion. Christopher still sends occasional legal threats that go nowhere. Victoria started a blog about surviving social injustice that no one reads. Their children, with the exception of Brittany, continue to blame everyone but themselves for their circumstances. And me? I wake up every morning in a beautiful home I earned, go to work at a business I built, and surround myself with people who value kindness, hard work, and integrity. I donate generously but quietly to causes that matter. I mentor young people who, like me, started with nothing but determination. And yes, I still stay in room 105 occasionally, just to remember where I came from and how far I've traveled. The Maxwells were wrong about one thing above all: I was never nothing. None of us are. We all have inherent worth that no one else gets to define or diminish. The greatest power we have is choosing to see that worth in ourselves and others, to build rather than tear down, to elevate rather than humiliate. That's the real lesson of my story. Not that I own the hotel that kicked me out, but that I refuse to let anyone else own my sense of self. As I finish sharing this story with you, I want to ask: have you ever been made to feel less than by people who should have lifted you up? What did you do to reclaim your worth? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every one, and you never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales of triumph over adversity. And please, share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that their worth isn't determined by others' opinions. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, you define your value, no one else. Until next time, keep building your empire, whatever that looks like for you.